All right, good afternoon and welcome to the February 22nd meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District Board Finance Committee. We're welcoming everyone here today, and in order to provide the safest environment for staff and the public, and pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361, the Board of Directors and staff may participate in meetings via phone, video conferencing, and in a hybrid in-person or remote attendance. And as you can see, we're doing that today. Once again, welcome. I think everything's in order so far. Connie, would you please give some of the parameters on how we welcome the public to speak and participate in our meetings, but can you tell us how the public can do that?
Sure. The public has three ways to make comments. You can do it via this Zoom link, which you can find on our website. This would be made available to public comment during the meeting. And this option, again, you can be found on our website. The second option is to email me, the recording secretary, at C as in Connie Swisher, S as in Sam, WISHER at ebparks.org. Hopefully by 3 o'clock today. And your other option would be to leave a voicemail, again, at my voicemail at 510-544-2401. These the voicemail comments might not make it to the meeting, but it would definitely be part of the official record. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, could you do a roll call of the members?
Sure. Roll call for Director Director Wieskamp.
Here.
Director Elizabeth Eccles.
Present.
And Chair Dennis Waspy.
Here.
Great,
Thank you. And Deb Spalding, would you introduce your staff members?
Hi there, everyone. I'm Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. And joining me today from the Finance Department, we have Kim Belingit. And who else? Christina Crosby, our Budget Manager, is here. And David Sumner, our Audit Manager. You guys don't have to turn on your cameras. And Tao Wong Se Pan, also from our Budget Department, is here from the Finance team. And then looks like we have staff from other departments too. Do you want me to read those off as well?
I'm sure we've got time.
Sure. All right. We've got Ruby Tumber from Operations. Who else? Robert Kennedy from Operations. Lisa Gorgon from ASD. And Zeb, well, he's an honorary ASD member, but he's actually from the Gordian Group, and you'll be hearing from him later today. And hopefully I didn't miss anyone there.
All right, great. Thanks. If we missed you, welcome. So our first item today is the December 31st, 2021 investment report and portfolio review. Deb, are you going to handle that?
Yes. So I just started sharing my screen. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right. So this is your December 31st investment report and portfolio review. And as usual, I will start us off with an overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to Allison County, who is here from PFM, and they are our investment consultants. And she's going to go more in depth into our investments. And starting us off by looking at the table, which is in your packet on page 3. And we always begin at the top, looking at our liquidity portfolio. And we're basically comparing how we were at December 31st as compared to how we were at September 30th at the end of the third quarter. And just to hit on a few highlights, I've circled with a little red circle the balances in CAMP, our California Asset Management Program. So that's our short-term, one of our short-term cash investments. And you can see that that number has bumped up when compared to last year at the same time. And so that's because our December property tax revenues were about $2.5 million greater than in the prior year. And so that's where we put that property tax money. It comes in, first goes into our bank account, and then we put it into like a slightly higher yielding investment in CAMP. Then the next bullet point is just a reminder to you guys to maybe help you understand how the funds flow into the district. So remember, December 31st, just a snapshot in time. It happens to be when our fiscal year closes. And if you look at our balance, if you look at our assets at that time, you see, oh gosh, the district has a lot of cash. That's because our property tax revenues have just come in. So we get those revenues, we get about 74 million in this past year from the two counties. And so we immediately have those funds, and then our fiscal year closes and it looks like, gosh, the district has a lot of money, but really we're drawing down on those funds through the year. That's what gets us through the rest of the next 6 months till we get our next infusion. And so again, it's just a snapshot in time. We get that big infusion of revenue right before we close our books. All right, moving on to short and midterm securities. Changes between September 30th and December 31st, you'll see increased holdings in treasuries, in corporate bonds and notes, and then reduced holdings in agency mortgage-backed securities and asset-backed securities. Our consultants from PFM will talk more through this. But overall, I wanted to bring your attention to the numbers circled in green at the bottom, comparing December 31st, 2020 to December 31st, 2021. You can see we increased our short and midterm security investments by about 10 million over the past year. So that was a conscious decision we made. We are trying to earn a little bit more on our investment portfolio by investing a little bit longer term. So we took money out of the short-term cash liquidity portfolio, and we're trying to invest longer term, putting it into those short and midterm securities. And I believe we'll be doing that again in this coming year. And speaking of trying to increase investment earnings, you'll notice that interest earnings are slowing. So this is down at the bottom of the page on that table. We talk about our investment earnings and just comparing December 31st, 2020 to December 31st, 2021, you see a big drop in our investment earnings. And that is because we had lower yield. You may recall, like the federal funds rate was dropped as we were trying to, as the Federal Reserve was trying to respond to the COVID emergency, and they dropped the federal funds rate. And so you might be thinking, oh, in 2022, now the federal funds rate is increasing, we'll start to see higher yields. But just a heads up, it's probably going to be a slower return in yields. And again, Allison will probably speak more about this, but bond prices have an inverse relationship to rates. So as yields start to rise, as that interest rate rises, prices fall. So we actually probably won't in 2022 see increased interest earnings. That might happen in 2023. We're hoping, fingers crossed. And that is it from me. I'm going to turn it over to Allison from PFM, and they've got their normal quarterly presentation, and then also a presentation on changing the portfolio benchmark to a longer duration. And that's something that was presented to last year's finance committee, but since we have some new members this year, we wanted to refresh you all on that. And then after she's done her presentation, then we'll need a recommendation to the full board.
All right, thank you, Deb. Would you entertain some questions on your portion of the presentation?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Does anybody have any questions? Any board members? Comments? Thank you for your good work. It looks like we're moving in the right direction. Any members of the public have any comments? Hearing or seeing none. Okay, let's move on to the PFM presentation.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. As Deb said, my name is Allison County, and I'm with PFM Asset Management, the district's investment advisor. Now I'll go ahead and pull up the quarterly presentation. And this presentation here was included in the agenda. I'm actually sharing it from the agenda packet so you can see the double page numbers on the bottom. So just providing you an update on the district's investment program, the portion that's managed by PFM as of December 31st. As we always do, I'll just start with a brief interest rate and market update, just to provide some context for what happened in the portfolio during the quarter. So just high level, looking at current market themes, or really market themes during the fourth quarter of the year. During that quarter, we saw COVID-19 caseloads reach record highs as the Omicron variant, highly contagious, went through the country. Unlike earlier occasions when we saw caseloads rise, we are seeing less of an impact on the economy when we see caseloads rise, especially with this most recent Omicron variant. So we didn't see, businesses shut down. There is still some hiring difficulty, probably related to COVID-19, but for the most part, it had a limited impact on the economy during the fourth quarter. The U.S. economy has really been characterized by, this won't be a surprise to hear, rapidly increasing inflation. I'll talk about more about this on the next page, but we are seeing for the past several months now, inflation at the highest levels it's been in about 40 years. We continue to see the labor market improve. After reaching near record high unemployment back in April of 2020, the unemployment rate has continued to steadily move lower. We see good number of jobs added each month. The unemployment rate dropped below 4% during the quarter. There are still challenges I mentioned. I'm sure you see it there. A lot of signs, people looking to hire. We do see more job openings than people looking for work. So that has caused some strain to the labor market. But overall, labor market conditions have really improved. Consumer confidence is down a little bit during the quarter, somewhat on COVID-19, but also on increasing inflation. However, the consumer does continue to be quite strong and really is driving economic growth in the U.S. The Federal Reserve is undergoing quite a few changes to their monetary policy. The Federal Reserve put into place very accommodative policies back in 2020 at the start of the pandemic to really stop the health crisis from turning into a financial crisis. And they did this by purchasing securities in the open market, purchasing longer term treasuries and agencies, and by lowering their Fed funds target rate down to near 0%. Both of these programs went into effect in early 2020, again, at the start of the pandemic. And during this most recent quarter, the Fed has started to pull back on some of these accommodative policies. For the asset purchases, that meant starting to slow the purchasing. So in November, the Fed began reducing their monthly asset purchases, and they will complete that by March. So in the next several days here, they will complete their asset purchasing. And then the big accommodative policy, the policy that has more of an impact on the investments that we buy for the district's portfolio, is that Fed funds target rate. I mentioned the Fed has held that rate near 0% since March of 2020, and that has really kept short-term interest rates, definitely interest rates on maturities under a year, but even kind of going out 2-3 years, it has kept those interest rates very, very low. And that's why we saw earlier when Deb showed those interest earnings, we saw the earnings on the liquid account reduce. That's because you see, LAYS, CAMP, money market funds all yielding pretty close to zero. But it also reduced the earnings on the funds managed by PFM, which are in about 1 to 3, 1 to 5 year area, as it keeps a Fed funds target rate at 0, keeps those interest rates low as well. But now that the economy is improving, we're at what could be considered full employment. Again, the Fed is pulling back that accommodative policies, and so they are expected to start raising interest rates this year, likely in March here at their next meeting. And then finally, what this has meant for interest rates. We say here bear flattening, but what that really means is that interest rates on the shorter end, again, where we invest a majority of the district's funds in that 5 years and under area, have been moving higher over the past quarter. The shorter term area of the market is preparing itself for those Fed funds rate hikes. And so interest rates are moving higher in anticipation of that. On the longer end, beyond 10 years, we actually saw interest rates move down a little bit over the quarter, as the longer term interest rates are more impacted by long-term inflation expectations and growth expectations. And then we'll get into a little bit more detail on some of these topics in the next couple of pages. Here, starting with inflation. So the chart here shows CPI, Consumer Price Index, over the past couple of years, kind of broken out by some of the larger sectors. And you can see starting from about April of 2021, inflation has been elevated and has moved higher. The Fed has about a 2% target for inflation. That's where they'd like to see year-over-year price increases be at 2%. And if you look at this red line, which is inflation, taking into account all the different contributions, for much of 2020, inflation ran below the Fed's 2% target. And that's really been the case for much of the past 5 or more years. But starting in spring of 2021, inflation started picking up, and it didn't stop picking up. This chart here ends at November, where inflation, as read by CPI, was 6.8%. December, we saw 7%, and then January, 7.5%. So again, year-over-year change in prices of 7.5%, and where the Fed has that 2% target. We are seeing prices increase across the board. I'm sure you're aware that one of the biggest areas is the used car and truck market. Those prices have grown exceptionally over the past year, but really we see it everywhere. Food prices, energy prices are especially high. You can see that at the gas pump. And so it is because of this elevated inflation that has stuck around here now for almost a year, that the Fed is pulling back on those accommodative policies. If we turn to the next page, looking at a little bit more at one of those accommodative policies, I'm here talking about, again, the Fed funds target rate. So the Fed sets the Fed funds target rate. It's an overnight rate, but as I mentioned, it really does impact the yield on securities out to about 5 years, but especially 2 years and under. And what this chart here is that we refer to as the dot plot. The Federal Open Market Committee members, the members who set the Fed funds target rate, release this dot plot 4 times a year. And it shows where the members of the Fed think that target rate should be at calendar year end. So looking at 2021, you can see all these dots, and each dot represents a member's opinion of where they think the rate should be. And everyone thought 2021 should end with the Fed funds target rate where it is right now at 0 to 0.25%. But then if we look at 2022, where we see a bulk of the line, we can see that a majority of the members at this time, which was mid-December, thought the Fed funds target rate, it would be appropriate to raise it 3 times in 2022. Now this thought that the Fed funds target rate should be raised 3 times up to a range of 0.75% to 1% is a big change from where the Fed was earlier in 2021. At the start of 2021, the Fed was thinking maybe 1 rate hike in 2022, likely coming at the end of the year. But because of that high and sustained inflation, the Fed has really pushed forward their Fed rate hikes in both in terms of the number of hikes and the pace at which they raise the Fed funds target rate. So again, this was from mid-December at the Fed's December meeting, showing about 3 rate hikes. That has even increased since then. The Fed met in January. At that meeting, they don't produce this chart, but they have talked about, and the market now thinks that the Fed might raise interest rates 4 or 5 times in 2022. And so that's why, again, we're seeing interest rates move higher. And I can show you that here on the next page. So the next page here, we're showing interest rate movement over the quarter. The chart on the left-hand side shows you the U.S. Treasury yield curve at 2 points in time. So along the bottom, you can see we're showing maturities of 3 months out to 30 years. And then the light blue line represents where interest rates were on September 30th, or the start of the quarter. And the dark blue line is interest rates on December 31st, so the end of the quarter. So if you look at 10 years and under, or really 5 years and under, where we invest a majority of the district funds, you can see the interest rates moved up quite a bit from 1 year out to 5 years. Again, those intermediate term interest rates or securities get ready for that Fed funds target rate hike. So even though they haven't hiked the rate yet, the market's preparing itself for that rate hike, and interest rates have moved higher. As Deb mentioned earlier, when interest rates move higher, it's kind of good and bad for a portfolio of fixed income securities. The good news is when we buy new investments for your portfolio, we're able to buy new investments at higher yields than we were 3 months ago, than we were a year ago. So that's great news, and that will add to your realized interest earnings. The downside of rising interest rates is that the market value of your current holdings falls. So you have unrealized market value losses in the portfolio. And when we look at the performance of the portfolio or the performance of any fixed income indices, we take into account both those realized earnings and those unrealized gains or losses. And in this quarter, because of rising interest rates, those were unrealized losses. And so that's what we're showing on the right-hand side. These are total returns of various U.S. Treasury indices. So not yet getting into the district portfolio, but just various market indices across the bottom. You can see a 1 year, 1 to 3 year, which is the district's benchmark, 1 to 5 year. That's the benchmark that we will be transitioning to, and then a 1 to 10 year index. So you can see across all maturities, returns for the quarter were negative. And so that means the unrealized losses due to rising interest rates were greater than the realized earnings. And that's just a natural part of rising interest rates on fixed income securities. So this is something that we'll see here when we look at the district performance in a couple pages, and something that we'll likely see for the next couple of quarters if interest rates continue to move higher, as we expect they will with the Fed set to hike interest rates. So that's my last page in the economic part. I can move into the portfolio. Please feel free, though, to jump in if you have any questions. So now I'll get into the portfolio. And here, just again, looking at the PFM managed portion. So Deb also showed you other investments that the district has that are not managed by PFM. But here, just looking at the portfolio managed by PFM, which was about $148 million invested as of December 31st. The portfolio had an effective duration, which is similar to average maturity of 1.78 years. And that compares with the benchmark duration of 1.82 years. So it was pretty close in line, however, just a little bit short of the benchmark duration at quarter end. Just so you're aware, the benchmark is in the footnote here. Because the benchmark has changed over time, we show it down in the footnote. And this, as Deb mentioned, and I'll talk about more a little bit later, this is the benchmark that will be changing for the district, moving from a 1 to 3 year Treasury index to a 1 to 5 year Treasury index. But right now, at quarter end, still in line with that 1 to 3 year strategy. You can see in the duration distribution chart at the bottom, and still managing performance against that benchmark. The portfolio was earning a yield at cost of 0.67% at quarter end. That's essentially the earnings rate on the portfolio. That yield at cost, we have seen move lower over the past, 2 years now, since the Fed dropped interest rates to zero back in March of 2020. We've been investing the portfolio in this low interest rate environment. We have seen that yield move down. But you can see the yield at market is 0.8%. So the yield at market means is if we were to purchase this exact same portfolio on December 31st, it would have had a yield of 0.80%, so a higher yield. And that kind of shows you that interest rates are moving higher. This is the first quarter over the past few years where we've seen the market rate move higher than the yield at cost. So again, the positive note of that is that moving forward, new investments will be purchased in this higher yielding environment. And as Deb said, going forward here, we'll start to see the interest earnings on the portfolio increase. The portfolio is very high credit quality. The chart on the lower left shows the S&P rating of the holdings in the portfolio. You will see, I'll just point out that there is a small allocation to BBB+ rated and also not rated. California government code and the district's policy, for the most part, requires that securities be rated A- or better. So securities in those two allocations do carry an A- rating or better, by another rating agency, but we're just showing S&P here. And then finally, in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the sector allocation of the portfolio. The portfolio is very well diversified among permitted investments. That said, with U.S. Treasury allocation at 49%, so just about half, that is a bit more to the Treasury allocation than we've seen historically, than we'd ideally like to see. Treasuries, they are the safest and most liquid investment, but they're also, not one of the lower yielding investments. However, given the recent interest rate environment, we haven't found a lot of value in some of the other sector types. Corporate notes, they do yield more than treasuries, but not a whole lot more. Not a lot more for the risk you're taking on with a corporate note. We don't think that the yield in many cases is compensating investors. During this past quarter, we did start to see those yield differences improve on these different sectors. So corporates are starting to yield more, asset-backed securities starting to yield more. So we did find some opportunities to add to those sectors. But overall, yield spreads are pretty narrow right now, kind of limiting opportunities. And if I turn to the next page, you can see the portfolio activity kind of highlighting what I just said there. So the chart here on the left-hand side shows you portfolio activity. So PFM sells securities, sometimes securities mature. Those are reinvested into the portfolio. And so we're showing here the different sectors that were utilized during the quarter. And you can see a bulk of the activity was in that U.S. Treasury sector, again, where we're really finding the most value. When we do find value in corporate notes or asset-backed securities at this time, it's usually in new issue and is very selective. So while we do continue to add to that sector, it's not as much as we've seen in the past. I mentioned we have seen those yield spreads start to improve. So we hope going forward, coming to the next year, we will find more opportunities in those high quality credit sectors to increase the portfolio's diversification. On the next page, I will turn to the portfolio performance. So like the index performance we talked about earlier, we do measure the portfolio's performance on a total return basis. So again, taking into account both your realized earnings, your interest earned, as well as your change in market value, including those unrealized gains or losses. So I'll talk about the last 3 months, so the quarter and the past year kind of together. So over the past year and the past 3 months, interest rates have moved up quite a bit. We saw earlier what happened over the past 3 months. And so because of that, you see in the top of that table, your change in market value is negative, representing unrealized market value losses in the portfolio, which are just a natural part of rising interest rates. You can also see your interest earned during those time periods. And then when you add those together to get your total return, which are what the bars in the chart above reflect, you can see that total dollar return was negative for the past 3 months and the past year because those unrealized losses were greater than your realized earnings. And if you move down a little bit on the table, you can see the portfolio return on a percentage-wise versus your benchmark return. So this is a key place where we show the benchmark return so that you can see how your portfolio has performed relative to a market benchmark. And in this case, the 1 to 3 year U.S. Treasury index. So for the past quarter, the portfolio, a slight underperformance of the benchmark, pretty close in line. That underperformance was due to the fact that Treasuries outperformed corporate notes during the quarter. They outperformed some of the other sectors. Treasuries were one of the best performers for the quarter because your benchmark is all Treasuries. It outperformed the portfolio by a small allocation. But if we look more historically, first starting with the past year, although negative, you can see your portfolio did outperform the benchmark due to that diversification as other sectors outperform Treasuries. And then, of course, we'd like to look long-term. It is a long-term portfolio. You want to look at the return over a full interest rate cycle. So going back 10 years, the portfolio earning 1.43% each year on average relative to the benchmark return of 1.09%. So outperformance of about 34 basis points each year on average. So that's very good performance of the portfolio relative to the benchmark. And then on the next page, we just strip out those unrealized gains or losses so you can see how your portfolio is doing on a realized earnings basis. So that's what we're showing here, the accrual basis earnings of the portfolio. And so as Deb noted, over the past year or so, we have seen this interest earned row decline as interest rates in the market are quite low. However, that's also the piece that we'll expect to see start to increase here in the coming quarters. Those numbers on the prior page, your total return, when you factor in unrealized losses, we may still see those numbers be quite low for the next few quarters if interest rates continue to move higher. However, we will expect to see your interest earned, your realized earnings start to move higher as we can reinvest into this higher interest rate environment. So again, the positive side to these higher interest rates. Okay, I just have here just a couple more pages in this presentation to talk about the ESG review, highlight the ESG score of the portfolio. So it's been almost a year and a half now, or 2.5 years, excuse me, that we have had an ESG initiative in the district's portfolio. Back in the spring of 2020, after, I'd say, a fair amount of education, of planning, of discussions, we did begin incorporating an ESG or environmental, social, and governance strategy into the overall portfolio. So by adding this approach, when choosing issuers to purchase for the district's portfolio, in addition to the traditional, financial and market considerations, we factor in non-financial, environmental, social, and governance considerations as well. The district's ESG criteria is stated in the investment policy. The criteria states that issuers must have an ESG rating of less than 30, so that represents medium risk or lower. There is some exception for slightly higher ESG risk if an issuer is one in the top percentile in their sub-industry, but in general, it's a ESG score of less than 30. So looking at the portfolio, about just under half of the portfolio's issuers have an ESG score. You can see here the U.S. Treasuries and the municipal obligations are not ESG rated. So when we talk about the score, we're looking at these other sectors, including, of course, all your credit instruments, corporate notes, negotiable CDs, asset-backed securities, as well as supranationals and federal agencies. So this page here is a lot on it, but it's just one big summary of the ESG rating on the portfolio. So just looking at the chart here, this top one, so the overall ESG risk rating of the portfolio as of December 31st, shown in the green bars, was 21.9. That compares to 22.2 from last quarter. So that's a slight improvement. The lower the ESG risk rating, the better the ESG risk profile. The rating improved just from small increases in some of the issuers' ESG risk rating. You can see the portfolio holds no issuers that have a severe ESG risk rating. The allocation to the high sector has declined a little bit, and then your low and medium rated ESG rated securities increased a little bit over the quarter. Moving below that to the exposure, overall that also improved slightly as a lower exposure score means lower ESG risk. The exposure is kind of like the starting point of a company's ESG risk, before they start to try to manage it, before you determine what kind of can't be managed, just the overall exposure. And so again, you can see that improved slightly. And then finally, the ESG management rating also improved slightly over the quarter. In this case, a higher management score generally reduces the ESG risk. And that's a rating assigned for how well a company manages the issues and risks they are exposed to. So over the past, again, year and a half or so, the district's ESG score has continued to improve. It has always been in that medium category, but we have seen it decline steadily since the ESG initiative was added to the portfolio. And so going ahead, we will continue to do that to try to improve the overall ESG risk rating of the portfolio. And so I'm going to stop there. The materials you have contain a lot of additional information, both on the ESG ratings in the portfolio, as well as all of the issuers and the transactions in the portfolio, but I won't go through that unless there are specific questions. So I can pause now to see if there's any questions on the report, and then I can just very briefly talk about the benchmark extension.
Does anyone have any questions on the report so far?
None so far. I have questions on the benchmark extension, but she just said she was going to talk about it. So I will wait until after she gives her presentation on that.
Okay, thank you. Any members of the public? I guess, I don't know if it's appropriate here, but when the feds raise interest rates, is there a lag time before they're applied to some of the instruments we use? Or does the Fed raise rates on March 22nd and then immediately, right then, our investments increase based on whatever the return would be, or the projected return, or whatever the interest rates they're giving us?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's actually the market interest rates on securities in the market, so U.S. Treasuries, high quality corporate notes, federal agencies. So we actually see them start to move higher before the Fed raises interest rates, which is what we saw here. When we look at that, because even though the Fed hasn't raised rates yet, if you're going to buy a 2-year security, 2 years from now, interest rates will be higher. So the market starts to prepare for that on some of those slightly longer maturities, again, 1 to 5 years. Now, very, very short investments, such as overnight investments like money market funds or other short-term accounts, such as LACE or the Camp Pool, those interest rates on those types of funds are closer to immediate. Not exactly immediate, but so they haven't moved at all, really. The Camp yield's been about 0.2 for the last many months. LACE has been at 0.2. Camp has been at 0.05 for the past, quite a while now. And those yields on those very, very short investments have not moved higher yet. But they will be more once the Fed actually raises rates. And that's because the investments in those types of accounts are very, very short-term securities. The longer-term maturities move in advance of a Fed rate hike. Very, very short ones kind of will move with the Fed rate hike.
All right, thank you. I guess there are no further questions.
Okay, so can you all see I just switched the presentation there to the benchmark presentation? Okay, great.
Yes.
So as Deb mentioned at the last meeting, we talked about this as well, that the decision was made to extend the benchmark. So today I'm just kind of going over that again with you again, because majority of you were not at the last meeting. So just to provide a little update on the benchmark here. So as we just discussed in the report, currently the district portfolio is managed according to a 1 to 3 year strategy, and its benchmark is the ICE Bank of America Merrill Lynch 1 to 3 year U.S. Treasury Index. The U.S. Treasury 1 to 3 year U.S. Treasury Index is comprised of all U.S. Treasuries with maturities of 1 to 3 years. So it's agnostic. It can't find value where on the yield curve. It can't find value in different sectors. It just comprises all U.S. Treasuries with maturities of 1 to 3 years. And so when we manage the portfolio, when we look at the benchmark, one thing that we try to and do stay in line with is the duration of the benchmark. As I showed you earlier, the portfolio at quarter end had a duration of 1.78. This 1 to 3 year benchmark was 1.82. So we really do manage the portfolio in line with the benchmark duration. You will note that the sector allocation of the portfolio is not in line with your benchmark. Again, your benchmark, all U.S. Treasuries. The sector allocation of your portfolio is very diversified. The portfolio has done very well against your current benchmark. Here, just kind of recapping performance that we just saw. So the portfolio has done well versus this benchmark since over the past 10 years. Then in late 2021, the district decided to extend the benchmark, the strategy, to a 1 to 5 year Treasury index. So kind of taking a step back, so over the course of the engagement, district and PFM, we periodically review the district's strategy and the benchmark to ensure it continues to meet the district's objectives of safety, liquidity, and return. We do think that the 1 to 3 year benchmark did meet these objectives, but in discussions of how the district can safely potentially increase interest earnings, well, one way to do that is to extend the duration of the portfolio, extend your benchmark. And so looking at if that was appropriate, for the district, of course, everybody wants to safely increase your interest earnings or your total return. So we wanted to look at a few things and see if that was appropriate. So we looked at, the portfolio assets. So those securities that are managed by PFM, the ones that aren't really needed for liquidity, we have continued to see those assets grow. And so one thing that means is that the district hasn't really needed to tap into those funds for any cash flow liquidity purposes. The district maintains separate liquidity in some of those overnight or shorter term accounts and has allowed that portfolio to grow. And that's really important because if you are going to be adding, longer term securities, you'd like to not have to be pulling a lot of funds out, at least not on a regular basis. And so that was one of the reasons that we thought it was appropriate to extend the duration of the portfolio. Another mentioned here is tolerance of volatility. And what we mean there is volatility of market values, longer dated securities, longer dated benchmarks, portfolios, so even longer dated going from a 3 year security to a 5 year security has more market value volatility. Both on the good side, interest rates are falling, your longer holdings have higher market value increases. And when interest rates are rising, like they are, your longer securities have slightly larger market value losses. So just being tolerant of that volatility in market values, and we discussed, and the district is comfortable with that. And then, of course, going back to the other reason why you would extend your benchmark, and that's because historically, longer duration benchmarks or portfolios have offered higher earnings and returns. So the table here shows the 1 to 3 year U.S. Treasury Index, the current benchmark, and the 1 to 5 year U.S. Treasury Index, the benchmark that we're transitioning to. As of December 31st, you can see the yield on the longer benchmark is higher, but also the total return. So even when you factor in those gains, unrealized gains and losses, that longer strategy has outperformed a shorter duration strategy. And so that was the rationale for making the decision to change the benchmark at this time. So now the transition, we also decided that we wanted it to be a gradual transition, starting, day one, like tomorrow, we didn't go out and sell all your short investments and buy a bunch of 5 year investments. It will be a very gradual and strategic extension to happen over the next 3 quarters, to be completed by September 30th of 2022. This will just help reduce some of the volatility. Also, in this rising rate environment, it will kind of work out to be somewhat of a measured approach to continue to take advantage of those higher interest rates as yields move higher. The portfolio's maturities will continue to be well laddered, from 0 years out to 5 years, but that allocation to the 3 to 5 year area will increase as there's just a very small allocation to that area of the yield curve right now. And then the district will continue to maintain sufficient liquidity in those overnight accounts. So those funds will continue to be available to meet the cash needs of the district. That said, the securities, the funds in this portfolio managed by PFM, even with a longer duration strategy, are still always available to the district should you need additional liquidity. The securities are all very high quality, very liquid, and so securities can be made available as needed. And then just finally, again, based on the historical data, the district should expect to see higher returns and earnings over the long term, with some increased volatility, quarter to quarter, but over the long term, increasing your earnings and total return. So that's all I had on the benchmark. Again, just a real brief overview. I can take your questions.
Great. Elizabeth, you had a question?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Allison, for your report and also for the update on the benchmark change. It's really, all of it is very helpful, and you partially answered my question. So I was just interested, given that the slightly longer term maturities, the 3 to 5 years, have already, baked in a lot of that Fed hike that's going to be occurring over the next year. Like, does that make it, is that a good thing for us in the sense that now we'll be investing in these at presumably a lower price and higher yield? Or I'm just interested in how that rise in the 3 to 5 years impacts our strategy. Well, it doesn't sound like it impacts our strategy, because we're going to still do, this is going to be gradual, and so that all makes sense. But I'm wondering if that's a good thing for us in terms of this strategy.
Yeah, I think so. And so, of course, one of the things, whenever you're extending duration, or even in your current strategy, buying longer term securities in a rising rate environment, it'd be wonderful if you knew exactly when interest rates are going to peak, and then you would make your move right then. But of course, we don't know when interest rates are going to peak. As you noted, they're on the rise right now. And so we will begin moving into this higher rate environment. So it's a good timing in that way. If we had done this a year ago, interest rates would have been much lower. So doing it now is benefiting the district right away with these higher yields, but then also taking this slower approach, kind of, if you will, dollar cost averaging the kind of the longer dated maturities should also benefit the district. Again, because we don't know exactly when interest rates are going to peak, but we do expect them to continue to rise throughout the year. Interest rates already moving higher in anticipation of Fed rate hikes. They'll likely continue to move higher as actual rate hikes happen. They won't, when the Fed raises interest rates 25 basis points, they won't jump 25 basis points because they're already getting prepared, but they will likely continue to slowly move higher. So by kind of not doing it all now, but kind of waiting and doing piece by piece throughout the year, it should continue to benefit the district moving into higher rates as we go on.
Great, thank you.
Dennis,
Yes.
Allison, would you call this rather a moderate position for the district?
Yeah, so it definitely is not a huge change in strategy. Going from a duration now of about 1.8, moving to about, I know I didn't show it, but about 2.5 years average duration. It's not a big change at all. A 1 to 3 year or 1 to 5 year strategy and benchmark, it's very common for California public entities. That's what you see the most, probably 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 year. So it's definitely not a big major change, but it is a change that we hope, that what we would expect to see have definite improvement in the returns on the portfolio over the long term, but is by no means a dramatic change in strategy.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and Allison, I think that would be my question. I think you just answered it. Was that, and Director Wieskamp brought it up. So the moving to 1 to 5 year strategy, is this? I know PFM staff and the prior committee members of the Finance Committee wanted to move in this direction. Is that where the HERD's moving? You mentioned other public agencies. Is the HERD moving in this direction, or are we stepping out on our own, or does this seem to be the way of the world now?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely by moving to a 1 to 5 year, I think within a majority of the accounts that we work with in California, again, public agencies, and even others that we don't work with that I've seen though. But, because California code limits much of your investments to under 5 years, that really 1 to 5 year area is the most common place to be. It's also common to do what the district did, was start with a slightly shorter duration or shorter strategy, and over time extend out. So you most certainly, will find, many partners in this 1 to 5 year area. You won't be alone out there, that's for sure.
I'll just jump in and add, last week, a few of us were down at the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers and went to a few presentations on managing California investments, and heard presentations where I asked questions like, what benchmark are you using? And 1 to 5 years was the answer I got. So we are, I think, within, this is a best practice out there, and we're moving in the direction of where the herd is going, I think.
Great. Thank you. So I think that completes this presentation, right? The whole deal. And we have the opportunity. Thank you very much for your report, Allison. And thank you, Deb. So our charge as the committee is to recommend to the full board approval of the investment report and portfolio review for this past year. Do I have a motion to recommend to the full board?
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Director Eccles and a second by Member Wieskamp. Any comments, questions from anyone? Hearing none, all in favor. Connie, would you do a roll call vote, please?
I sure will. Recording Secretary Connie Swisher, taking roll call vote. Director Wieskamp,
Aye.
Director Eccles,
Aye.
and Chair Waspy.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Our next item, and one of my favorites, is the 2021 disposal of fixed assets. I think Kim Belanget's going to give us a presentation on that. Welcome, Kim.
Hey, Kim, I'll do the screen sharing. Is that good?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes. Deborah, if you can forward me to the next slide. Okay. Okay, well, welcome. Here we go. Once again, I'm Kim Belanget, the accounting manager, and I'm here today to present to you the 2001 fixed asset disposal list. In your packet, it's on page 72. It's a list of disposed assets by disposal categories and their related book value. Next slide, please. So in each year, the Park District undergoes a physical inventory starting in October. The results are returned to finance, and any changes are recorded in the asset module of the district's finance system. So in 2021, we had 24 assets sold at auction, and the total proceeds were a little over $200,000. 16 assets were considered non-auctionable and were either recycled or disposed. 2 assets were donated. They are Type 6 fire engines designed for rigorous off-road firefighting, one each to a volunteer department. That was Spring Valley in Milpitas and Bell Canyon in Bell Canyon, California. We had 1 asset that was traded in. We received a credit of $5,000, which was applied towards purchasing a new replacement printer scanner. Under the board operating guidelines, any adjustments to the financial records requires assets with a book value over $25,000 is subject to board review. This year I have 2, a water treatment system and a caretaker residence. Next slide, please. Here we have the water treatment system at Del Val Regional Park. This picture here, it's 45 years old. It's classified as a transient non-community water system, limited to 25 regular full-time employees, made with several thousand feet of old asbestos cement pipes. Next slide, please. This is our new system. This one is classified as a non-transient, non-community water system, one you might find at a school or a business that provides their own water. It meets industry standards and allows for more remote operation. The pipes replaced with high density polyethylene HDPE pipes, which resist corrosion, scaling, and are flexible. Next slide, please. And here we have the caretaker residence at Camp Arroyo. It's a 400 square foot trailer with 1 bedroom. It was used by the camp director at Camp Royal. It was never intended to be any type of long-term residency. And currently residing in there are rodents. Next slide, please. And here is the new residence. It's double in size, approximately 800 square feet,
Wow.
has 2 bedrooms, built with sustainable features like sustainably sourced lumber, heat pump, HVAC, and water heater, energy efficient metal roof, concrete slab foundation, spray foam insulation, and a new septic tank. And that's pretty much my presentation. Does anyone have any questions on these items or any of the items on the list?
Any questions, comments? Board members? Oh, hearing none. Oh, this is my favorite one, Kim.
Okay.
Dennis
so
wants
happy.
that.
Having had a lot of experience in this, so it's I mean, just a comment. If in fact, and I know I nickel and dime everything, and when we just hear we've got $300 million hanging around working for us, but so in our last presentation, we heard that one of the biggest forms of inflation we've got is the used car and truck market. And I'm looking at some of these incredible deals you can get at auction. And I'm assuming we still play the same auctioneer, or we're up there at auction in Vallejo. Is it still?
Yeah, actually, we've moved over to Dixon. We deal with JJ Kane. They're right off of 80. You can actually see their lot where all the cars are. But we used to have First Capital. That was in Vallejo.
Okay, well, so and that's a good another question also. Of the $200,000 we received that we sold these 24 items for, how much do we pay the auctioneer?
Oh, that I don't know. I can definitely find out for you.
Yeah, okay, it's no big deal, but
Okay.
I'm thinking some of these, I'm looking at a 2015, a 7-year-old Ford Explorer that we paid $35,000 for, went for $4,200. I hope, well, I don't know what we could do, but I'd love to do that thing where we could, and I don't know that would be considered illegal or practical or make any sense, but to offer these vehicles in an auction to our employees, I think would be, because the thought of getting a 2015 vehicle that's only 7 years old, it's a Ford Explorer for crying out loud, and getting it cost $35,000 and we sold it for $4,200. I think there could be some value in selling that, either making more on these things or selling them to our employees. Also, on the well, just a comment. I think it's incredible. I credit the fire department, and I'm not sure who in the fire department did it, but for us to buy these incredibly expensive Type 3 engines that we buy, that start off at well, we're talking about the original amounts that we paid for them. I think they're much higher than that now. But to donate them to another fire department, I think makes total sense. There's a lot of volunteer fire departments around the state, and even in our region, as shown by who we're giving these to. They really can benefit from these things. And I compliments to whomever thought that up, to instead of just selling it at auction for an incredibly low price, to give it to another agency. And most of our fire trucks have a life to them. And, you can look at a fire truck and say, oh, it's been around for 20 years. They're not used every day. And they have way low mileage on them, and they're built to the max. They're maintained to the max. So this is a really, really good thing in my opinion. So compliments to whoever did that. And I guess, yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, Dennis, on that same note with the fire engines, I did reach out to the public safety, and they said they engaged in conversations when they're out in the field. And that's how the conversation comes up about, hey, you guys are getting rid of something. what is it? And in this case, this is our, I don't know, fourth vehicle that we've donated. And, they're always to areas that are so remote and, they probably only have one fire engine to work with. So, most cases now they have two. So definitely.
Yep. Excellent idea. Thank you very much. So
Thank you.
any other comments from anyone? And once
Yes.
again, oh, pardon me, Ann, go ahead.
Your suggestion on potentially selling them to our employees, we might look at some districts that have very small budgets and see if they would be interested in buying some of these vehicles that would be very useful for them. We're unusual in that we have the budget to buy, we maintain them well, and we get rid of them at the appropriate time. But the idea of reuse and helping other agencies that need help or our employees, I think that those are both worth exploring.
I agree. Okay, so if there are no further comments, we do have this is an action item.
It
Yes.
is.
So do we have a motion to recommend to the full board to approve the disposal of these as fixed assets?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Director Wieskamp and a second by Director Eccles. Connie, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Recording Secretary Connie Swisher, taking roll call vote, Director Wieskamp,
Aye.
Director Eccles,
Aye.
and Chair Waspy.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your presentation, Kim.
All right.
Our
Thank you.
next item is job order list,
Oh,
quarterly report. Welcome, Lisa.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Director Wasby, directors. Lisa Gorgon, I'm going to share my screen quick. How does that look?
it's fine.
Good. Okay, great. Good afternoon, Lisa Gorgon, Chief of Design and Construction. Advance my slide. So today, this is our first presentation to the Finance Committee. I'm here this afternoon with Ren Bates, Capital Program Manager, and Zeb Butcher. He's our Gordian Group representative to work with. And we thought that it would be nice this afternoon to take an opportunity to put a face to a name so you could meet Zeb. He's been working with us for quite a while. And he is going to be presenting on the services that he and the Gordian Group provide to the district. Last May, the district advanced an RFP or advertised an RFP for job order contracting administrative procurement services. The only proposal the district received was from Gordian Group, who had previously been under contract with the district since 2017. So we've been working with Zeb since that time on projects that are already determined to utilize the job order contracting procurement process. And so this afternoon, we're going to give that opportunity to Zeb to walk you through what he does. We feel like it's pretty highly specialized, the experience and the expertise that Gordian Group and Zeb bring to really ensure that the district gets the best value on these projects where we utilize the job order contracting. So, but before I do that, I'm going to give an update on the current projects that we have in construction or notice to proceed or that we're pricing. This information is also in your packet, so I'm not going to go through it in detail, but just as a reminder, we do this. This is part of our JOC policy and procedures is to present quarterly to the Finance Committee. And we provide information on the approved project cost and the Gordian Group cost as well to administer those. let's see. And I'm going to, let's see. I'm going to just, so again, I'm not going to, I have some photos, so I'm just going to share these. We have 11 projects that are currently either in construction or notice to proceed has been issued. And then we have 14 projects that we are working on to review. We know they're far enough along that we'll be able to give do pricing for them shortly. And as a reminder, these projects have all been funded in the budget. We work with finance ahead of time to know which projects we're going to utilize procurement, job order contracting procurement for. So they either show up as individual projects or in program areas. And just a word on these project lists. And I did want to follow up at our meeting in November. We heard some comments and some issues raised by AFSCME representatives about some of the contracts that are being awarded. And so I did want to share that in talking with my colleagues in MAST and operations, they are working on responding to those comments and will be presenting a report to the operations committee. So that will be happening later this year. And Robert Kennedy, the chief of MAST, is here as well. But I did want to just take that opportunity because we just want to make sure that we're being responsive. So I'm going to show a couple photos before I turn it over to Zeb. This is, I think we've had site tours and we've seen this before. These are repairing the piers at Cogswell Marsh. This is day and night work. It's really depends on the tides. So this work just wrapped up. It's typically done usually in November and December. That's the work window. So there's this, and then we also just wrapped up the work at Hoffman Channel Bridge. Again, we're jacketing or fixing those piers on that bridge and then doing some channel stabilization. And again, this is because of the time of year and because of the tidal influence, it's day and night work. This is just some examples of some projects that we're pricing. So at Radke Martinez Regional Shoreline, this is a tidal inlet and outlet gate. So we're going to be looking at that to do some repairs there. And then out at Round Valley, the little Lydia Lane residence is going to have some renovation work. So those are just some photos of some of those projects that I showed that were in pricing. Before I turn it over to Zeb, I thought I'd just take a pause to see if there's any questions or comments.
Any questions, comments by board members? Hearing none, I guess I have one. Lisa, so when I'm reading what the Gordian Group does and then what the contractor does and what the district does, and I'm wondering who's in charge of getting permits for these projects? Does that fall the district?
The district, yeah. So the district develops the plans and the construction drawings, and then we go get permits. And then those permits are part of, they create, they inform the construction, what's allowed and what method we're going to use. And so we really need those permits before we can get pricing, because, as I just showed you that day and night work, that's a permit condition that the contractors need to meet.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you.
I think there are no other questions. So,
I have just a quick comment.
oh, pardon me.
Yeah. So Lisa, I just wanted to say thank you for your attention to the concerns that Meadow Darcy had raised previously. I do think it's really important to have visibility into how these decisions are made and whether we're contracting out work that Park District employees could be doing. So I just wanted to say thank you and your colleagues who are working on that.
Yeah, I think Robert is, they've been working on it. So that will be good to follow up later this year.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm just going to introduce Zeb. And actually, I'm going to just say that we've been working with him for a number of years. You may have seen him around the building, and but he has really exceptional knowledge in this field. So Zeb, I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon, everyone. I recognize a lot of the names and faces, but for some of those of you that don't know me, I'll give you a quick background of who I am, and then I'll talk a little bit about the job order contracting process and what Gordian does for the Park District. So again, my name is Zebediah Butcher. I'm the area manager and account manager assigned with Gordian, assigned to the East Bay Regional Park District. A little bit about myself. I'm local to the Bay Area, grew up in San Francisco, California, currently reside in Oakland. My background is in architecture and construction management with a bachelor's degree in architecture and city and regional planning from UC Berkeley. I practiced architecture and construction management for about 20 years in the private sector at an architecture firm, Murakami Nelson, in the Oakland East Bay area. Before moving over to the public sector, where I was a project manager and inspector of record and assistant construction manager at San Francisco State, working for the CSUs. So that's how I got introduced to job order contracting and Gordian. So I was once on the client side, like yourselves, before joining the company. So I've sat on both sides of the table when it comes to job order contracting and Gordian. I was assigned to the East Bay Regional Park District back in 2016. Around the same time I went to work for Gordian. So I've been with the Park District just almost as long as I've been with Gordian, and this account is personal and special to me, as I've been here for that, for the same length of time. And there's a lot of shared interests. Being that I live in Oakland and I frequent a lot of the parks with my family, and especially my 6-year-old twins. Matter of fact, we just had back-to-back birthday parties at Roberts Park this past weekend. So I'm always in the park and have a lot of shared interests. So I'm happy to offer and render services to the Park District. Next slide, Lisa, please. So for our services, in general, there's so much that we offer, but in general, I'd like to, for the sake of understanding and for the time we have, is broken up into two parts. Part one being the bidding phase, and part two being the actual procurement. So during part one, the bidding phase, I work with the district to prepare the contract documents, which are the district front end specs, combined with the construction task catalog, which is a catalog that Gordian puts together with thousands and thousands of pre-priced construction tasks, as well as the district technical specs. So those three documents work as contract docs. I'll talk about the construction task catalog that we provide in a little bit more detail. But the construction task catalog, we refer to it as the CTC, is what we provide to the district at the time of bid that general contractors bid on, and they submit their bid factors, which covers their overhead and profit. So pretty much they put a factor to the prices that we have in the construction task catalog, and it all ends up being in their general contract, working as preset pricing for all the construction tasks that are going to be done during the term of the contract. And these factors that they put on the construction task catalog are the means by which the district awards them the contract on a low bid award basis. And then typically these contracts are annual term contracts. And so that's part one, the bidding portion of it. Now, part two, where we talk about the procurement phase, this is after the contracts have been awarded to the general contractors. The individual projects or job orders, as we saw in those lists that Lisa presented, are issued by the district. And I work with the district's project team through every phase of the procurement, which I'll discuss in a little bit more detail too. Next slide, Lisa. So like I mentioned, the contract documents for bidding phase are the front end specs, which is the district boilerplates. And the construction task catalog, which is what we provide, and then the technical specs. In this photo shown, there's just 2 catalogs for the construction task catalog. But typically, if you ship them and you ask for actually a hard copy, there's so many construction tasks, it's more like 4 or 5 of those books. And we've converted them and now use a disc, or we do it all electronically just to save the trees, unless you guys ask for it to be printed out. We don't print them out because there's tons and tons of construction tasks and catalogs that get typically, I think for you guys have 3 different contract types, so it would be 10 or 15 books. But anyway, the CTC is a catalog of books filled with thousands of construction tasks with preset pricing. The prices on each task item consists of 3 main components, which is prevailing wage labor rates, the material costs, and equipment costs. And every time we go out to bid, and for every type of contract, we generate an updated version of this construction task catalog, which is derived by information that we get from RS Means, which Gordian owns, and they've owned for the past 3 or 4 years, which is the leader in estimating and construction estimating and contracting costs. Currently, the district has 8 active contracts, 3 A-license contracts, which is typical engineering work, 3 B-license projects, which is typical building work, and 2 paving contracts. So currently the district has a total 3 different contract types, but a total of 8 contracts. Like Lisa mentioned, about a year ago, before this last round of contracts, to get these 8 contracts in place, there was an RFP put out for job order contracting services, and we were the only ones that responded and have been around doing job order contracting, I guess nationally, about 30 years. So we are a leader in that industry, and well, so it wasn't surprising that we were the only ones that responded. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the CTC, the Construction Task Catalog. Like I mentioned, it's a catalog of pre-priced construction tasks. So prior to bidding, I make sure that the CTC prices are updated to reflect the current prices. And like I mentioned, how we do so is from the data research and resource that we have in RS Means. But we also evaluate the prevailing wage labor rates, the material costs, and the equipment costs for a 20 to 25 mile radius outside of all the East Bay Regional Park District areas. So that includes your 65 to 70, I think 70 and counting parks. And within 20 to 25 miles of that, we figure out what the prevailing wage labor rates are, the material costs and equipment costs of that area. And we also project out a year because the contracts are going to be out, for their typically annual contracts. So together we're using that information. We come up with the updated pricing that we populate in the catalog. And that's how we make sure the pricing that we have is current. In addition to that, the contractors do have the ability to review those, the catalog and review the pricing that they're used to and evaluate what we've put in the catalog. And that's what they mark up and put their factor on, which is how the district awards those contracts. So working with me, I work with the program manager, which is Ren Bates. And I also conduct a pre-bid meeting or conference for the contractors prior to bidding, which includes, but not limited to explaining the job order contracting process to the contractors, walking them through the bidding steps, going through exercise of how to calculate accurately their bidding factors, and also letting them know the training that'll be offered, that's offered to the contractors once and if they're awarded a contract. Next slide, please. Now, the technical specs are simply they just serve as the part of the construction documents, which speaks to the quality of materials and workmanship, and it corresponds with the construction task catalog. So if there's anything technically that we want to specify at the bidding stage of how we want the outcome of projects to be and the quality of projects, we put them in the technical specs, and they align with the construction task catalog and other construction documents. Next slide, please. So now this is getting into part 2 of it, of the process, which is the procurement process. So this is once and if contractors have been awarded, we enter into the procurement process. And that's when we execute the job orders and the projects, similar to the list that Lisa presented, with projects that are currently being priced and projects that are on your backlog list of future projects. So once the contracts have been awarded by the district, we get into this part 2 of the job order contracting process, which covers these 6 steps. And the first step, there's the joint scope meeting. So in the initial stages, when a job order is presented to me by the district from either one of the 4 departments, and I typically work with DECO, design and construction, maintenance and skilled trades, finance and management services, the operations group. I also work with I've done one-off job orders and projects with the fire department, as well as public safety. So before these projects come to me, they've already been vetted through the project initiation form process, which is a form that we've generated that will have a brief scope of work. The scope of work is reviewed, the budget is reviewed on there, and it's noted, it's been signed by the project manager or unit manager, as well as the chief of whichever design is issuing the project, as well as the programs manager, which is Ren. So it gives me an outlook of the project and which direction we're going to go. So with this information, I discussed with Ren, the capital project program manager, and recommend which contractor I think would be best suited for that project. And that scope of work is based on past construction history, the contractor's experience, or the contract capacity, and potentially also the relationship that they may already have with a specific district department or project site, and work they've already completed at a specific park. So, and then being that JOC is used by a job order contracting is used by different departments, I uniquely sometimes end up being the link between these different departments when it comes to some information sharing that has to do with construction and the different departments and how different departments execute their construction, and for past, present, and some of the future projects. So I'll talk a little briefly about the steps, and then to give you a little bit better understanding. And I think Board Member Waspy had a question that alluded to permitting and such, so we'll touch on that as well. For step 1, with the information from the project initiation form, I coordinate and set up a joint scope meeting. So it's typically like a job walk, which would include the selected contractor, myself, the project team from the district, which includes, project manager, a unit manager, a construction inspector, the park supervisor, and occasionally a member from the environmental team, which may include a biomonitor from time to time. We meet at the site and go over the brief scope of work description, as well as park specifics or park constraints or environmental concerns and parameters that relate to certain permits that may or may not affect the project. We also discuss scheduling and any site specifics that the contractor may need to know or factor in when he puts together his price proposal for review and approval. So now step 2, that talks about the detailed scope of work. With the information that we gather at the joint scope meeting in step 1, once sometimes questions come up and things we may need to further investigate and research before we come up with a detailed scope of work. And that gets finalized after discussing with myself, the project manager and unit manager. And then I prepare a request for proposal that I send over to the contractor to request them to put together their proposal. Now, the proposal they put together, it's all based on the preset unit pricing in the construction task catalog that is part of their construction document. So they go they have the scope of work from all the information gathered, and they go back to the construction task catalog and search through there and get the associated and related construction task items and submit them in their catalog and input the quantities and such. And then in step 4, and so that's step 3, putting together their proposal. In step 4, they submit their price proposal for review. So the review process goes through several stages. Initially, they submit it to me and I review the proposal, and I like to call it scrubbing the proposal. So what I do is take out all the fluff, or if there's any exaggerated quantities, or if there's any line items that, where they take the premium cost of certain things, because there's several line items. So I review that and just make sure it aligns with the scope of work that was discussed and approved in the field and when we had the previous meeting. Then it further gets passed on to the project manager and then the unit manager as well for review and approval. And then once it passes those stages, it eventually goes to the chief of the department and the AGM for additional signatures and approval via the job order authorization form. So all these forms are generated by Gordian and put together for processing for a purchase order. And I circulate all the forms from the project initiation form, the detailed scope of work, the job order authorization, as well as the G7 form that's generated by the district that reflects the budget for specific projects. And I put them together and submit them to the project manager, who further reviews them and sends it on to the purchasing and finance department, where they will issue a purchase order, which leads up to step 5. So I typically call that assembly of documents I call it, some references as a notice to proceed packet or the PO packet. Different PMs in the district call it different things, but I put together those forms and they submit them to purchasing and finance to issue the purchase order. So once the PO is issued, then I draft up the notice to proceed document, consult with the project team for approval of the dates, and then I issue it to the contractor. A pre-construction meeting is then scheduled to discuss the project and the district construction specifics and schedule of the project. And then we decide the construction start and end dates, the contractor mobilization dates, project staging, what the line of communication is going to be during construction, and the emergency points of contact during construction. And then finally, during the construction process, I stay in close communication with the construction inspectors to see how the construction is progressing, and also to monitor the contractor performance and see how well the contractor is following the contract documents, as well as the details of their approved proposals, so I can have an informed decision on their progress and their evaluations for each job order. And knowing, because this keeps me informed on how to help select and designate contractors for future projects as they come up and as I'm consulted to process future job orders. If there's any construction or added scope of work, I keep in close communication with the construction inspectors, whether it's going to be an added scope or deductive scope, because they have to go through a similar approval process in revisiting the construction task catalog and putting a proposal together again for review. The contractors don't get to charge a premium, being that construction is also started and there may be added or deductive scope during construction. They have to revisit the construction task catalog because that's part of their contract, and issue proposals based on preset pricing. So I keep in touch with the construction process and I track and keep communications with the inspectors until a notice of acceptance or notice of completion is issued. And at that point, we consider the job order or the project complete. So that's at the end of step 6. So that's just a little bit of insight. So there's a lot more details that go on, but hopefully that gave you a general idea of the services we provide and what I actually do at the district and what I do for the district.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from board members?
One.
Member Wieskamp.
You know, I think this was so good that you brought Mr. Butcher forward, because I've always thought the program made sense, but I never understood all the things, the steps you had to go through. And I can see why you think a lot of people at the district know you. Talk to them and you've met with them up and down. So no, it seems to be working quite well. And I appreciate the fact that we did it and that you came and did this today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Director Eccles.
Yeah, likewise, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. Very informative, and I'm very happy to have you in this role, reviewing all of the proposed costs and scrubbing these proposals. It's very important. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah, and Zebediah, I have a couple of questions. So how many JOC contracts has the Park District done? We've done business with you guys for 3 or 4 or 5 years now, right? Time flies, I know, but.
Yes, we have done, we've done 3 rounds of contracts. These current 8 contracts that we have, I think they're at number 30, I want to say. So we've done 3 different rounds. This is these last, I think we've done a total, yes, of about 28.
Okay, great. And so I know with 28 projects, they're also varying and wildly divergent. We must have had some successes and failures, and I guess it might be a question of Lisa and her staff. I'm interested in how you feel about JOC and overall. I mean, we had this many contracts. We probably got a good idea of what's going on. Do you want to comment now, or I guess more specifically, I'm wondering, so I'm trying to follow who does what. And so what happens when there's change orders? Because I know contractors are famous for change orders. Now I know you're going to say, we'll just refer you back to the, or we'll approve it. And then you go back to the catalog and we'll pay you this much money to fix it. But I mean, do we have more of this? Is there more change order going on because, quote, they're the in-house contractors and now they haven't step up on everybody? I'm wondering who handles disputes and mediations, because you can't go through some of these big projects without disputes. And I'm wondering how you resolve those, or I'm wondering who resolves them. Is it Gordian or is it the Regional Park District? And it sounds like, I mean, when I look at some of these things are fairly small and you maybe not need it, but and the South County Courtyard looks like it's 619,000. I don't know what initiates construction management, and it sounds like Zebediah, you're a pretty hands-on guy. Are you on the projects? Once you've gone through all those 6 steps, do you show up at the project and at least not, well, monitor, I guess would be the wrong word, but do you check it out? Or who does construction management? Or do we need it? Or are these guys working out so well that they don't need it? They set their own schedule, they do it, they understand that we work around and we need to have our spaces back once you complete your projects and stuff like that, I guess.
Yeah, Dennis, I'm gonna start, and I'll probably hand it off actually to Ren a little bit, because I think the questions that you're asking, really a lot of the times the district's in the lead. You know, we're running these contracts. Zeb is, we talk about it as procurement. He's securing these, but our staff, the district staff, our project managers, they're responsible for the project budgets. They're responsible for understanding if there's going to be a change order or what is appropriate. That's working. And then of course we work with finance as well. But the other thing is you had mentioned about construction managers. We use our construction inspectors for these projects. So it's construction inspectors that are in design and construction that are administering them. You started off by saying kind of lessons learned, what's been helpful or what's been a failure and what's been a success. And I'm going to start to answer that question. I'm going to hand it over to Ren, but one of the things that we've learned since I've been here is that we need to have our permits before we price the projects, because the permits in design and construction, many of the projects we're working on have regulatory requirements. And so for us to try to price a project or proceed with a project before we know what our permit conditions require, that's where I think we've run into needing more supplementals, or we've had extended construction time because we have to do a lot of work in a short regulatory window. So that, I think, is a lesson learned moving forward, is that we're working with stewardship so that when we're working on projects that we are going to use job order contracting, a contractor for, we want to make sure that we have the permit well in advance of initiating a pricing. Ren, do you want to, I think you have more.
Sure. Ren Bates, Capital Program Manager. Director Wasby, your questions are, I'll try to hit on some of them. There was a stream there that I think I'll try to hit on and expound on what Lisa said. In terms of construction management, as Lisa and Zeb have pointed out, it's job order contracting, and Gordian is more of a procurement. So in terms of our construction management, that would be up to the project manager from whatever department is doing that project. So in other words, if Roads and Trails is using our paving contractor, that would be the project coordinator or project manager that would do the construction management, i.e. make sure that they respond to any RFIs or submittals, things of that nature, and or administer and monitor the change orders and budget. Where the Gordian Group comes in when we're in construction is if there are change orders, like job order contracting doesn't really have change orders because there's a fixed cost on all of our units. So there aren't really change orders to that because we have a fixed cost. So that's just a language thing. For all intents and purposes, it is a change order, but they don't call it that by law. So what the Gordian Group then does is help use the construction task catalog to amend any additional work that we have. So hopefully that answers that question. And then in terms of lessons learned, I think when we first started doing this, we were a new agency doing this. We got some contractors that did below, their adjustment factor was below cost. So we thought, what a deal. But then we realized that how can we do any work below cost? And so we've made adjustments in our mandatory pre-bids and trying to weed out some of those folks by stating that the district wants this to be a beneficial. We don't want to fight the contractors. We want them to make, a profit and make a living, but we also want the district to get a good value based on all the things that Zeb mentioned that the Gordian Group does in terms of providing our up to market costs and everything along those lines. So we're constantly learning. The district has many challenging projects that we're utilizing job order contracting for. I think what it does allow us to do is move through some of these maintenance projects that we have regulatory, like a general permit for. It allows us to do the job with the regulatory permits. And so it lets us do some of this more maintenance-based, regulatory-driven work in a timely fashion, so we don't have to come to the board every time to award a contract necessarily. So it allows us to do it expedites some of our procurement process for a lot of the work. So I'm very grateful personally of the support that the board's had for this program and moving it forward. I think we definitely have growing pains in terms of delivery, but from my experience in talking with staff, it's been beneficial, and I'm glad Zeb could join us today. We've lucked out with this representative of the Gordian Group being so involved in helpful with the district in setting this up and getting us running with this program. So I'm happy to field any other questions.
All right, well, thank you. And I guess just one or two more questions. So I'm trying to do a little bit of math here. I assume that Gordian Group gets 5% of the total project cost.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the case throughout?
Yes.
the total construction cost. So it's not total project cost, but whatever the agreed on construction price is, it's 5%.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
and just to amend that, Director Rossby, they do not get paid until such time that we do award those contracts or issue those POs. So in other words, all the work they do at the front end with the mandatory pre-bid meeting, set up the cash catalog, they don't get paid until we actually get a contract in and the contractor has a PO. So then they get the 5%.
All right, thanks. And do any other, what other agencies use JOC contract? Does East Bay Mud, SFPUC folks, our neighbors?
Yes, pretty much a lot of your neighbors, the closest one probably Alameda County, San Mateo County, City and County of San Francisco, all the California State Universities, all 23 of them. We have UC accounts as well, University of California, Berkeley has an active one, as well as UCSF, UCSF Medical. So yeah, pretty much Contra Costa County is another one. Pretty much most of all of your public agencies, they have it as a procurement method as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone's presentation. Now, is there any member of the public who would like to speak on this? I've heard that AFSCME and Meadow, is that you?
Yes, Meadow would like to say something.
It is me. Hello. Thank
Welcome.
you. Sorry, I'm sitting in my car trying to get to my doctor's appointment. So I wanted to make a comment. I'm sorry, my name is Meadow Darcy. I'm Chief Steward of AFSCME Local 2428. First, I wanted to thank the I think it was Lisa that mentioned that there is still some work going on in trying to get information for AFSCME. I appreciate that. I will say that this is the first I've heard of it. I haven't heard anything since I've brought that up. This is probably my third JOC meeting, so that means it's been at least 6 months since I've asked for this information, and it sounds like it's going to come sometime later this year. So that does seem like an awfully long time to engage in that process. I also wanted to point out that I did appreciate the presentation that Zeb presented there. I do, in looking at sort of that roadmap, I am looking at sort of a similar process that our project managers do. And so I know we only have 2 project managers in the entire park district. And of those 2, one of them, actually I work for one of them, and he is really bogged down with filling other positions that are vacant. So really hasn't been able to focus on some of those larger projects. So I would definitely like to see the district looking into hiring some more project managers to take on some of these larger projects so that we could have union workers doing this work. Additionally, there is a section in the MOU that states that as of February 1st of every year, the district shall provide the union with a report which reviews the use of outside contractors who perform work that is normally performed by district employees. So we recently requested that report, and all we got was a long list of all of the vendors that are charged to 6444, 6191, just a long list of vendors. So like Xerox is on there, Acme Fire Extinguisher. So we have asked for that information to be more detailed. We do believe that this list and the review that's supposed to go with it could be an opportunity to have this type of communication, to look at tasks that are being done and contracts that are being done by outside contractors. So we look forward to having that report initiate that conversation. And hopefully that can be a tool that every year we could talk about how the district is utilizing outside contractors, and whether, for example, with paving, if we're spending millions of dollars every year, perhaps looking at that looks like sort of a regular occurrence that we could look into hiring a crew for. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for letting me comment. And thank you everyone for all of your efforts put into this. And I would like to hear back from either the board or staff directly. Like I said, I haven't received any direct communication about my requests. This was the first time I heard about it here, that somebody was working on it, and that I guess it would be presented at Ops Committee. So I don't know, but I would like to know that information directly and be included in that process. Thank you.
All right, I think we can do that. Hopefully we'll be able to agree on the content of the report and get the reports out on a timely fashion. So this was an informational item. If there's no one else with any other comments, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Ren. Thank you, Zebediah. It's good to meet you. I hope we see you out in the parks.
With your
Thank you.
twins.
Yeah, bring the
Yeah.
kids. So,
Yeah.
thanks so much. And our next item is public comment.
Dennis, can I ask one more thing?
Oh, pardon me. Go ahead, Director Wieskamp.
I think it might be good for the rest of the board if they don't have time to see this whole report that we just heard and saw with Zebediah, to sort of do a write-up for them so they can access it at their leisure. Because I did find it very helpful to understand the process. And so I think it's worthwhile for all the board to have a chance to do that. Not a lot of work, but just something so they get a better sense of what's happening.
Good idea.
That's it. Thanks.
Anyone else? So we're back to public comment. I don't know if there's any public. I can't see any in the windows.
Chair Waspy, I've received no public comment after Darcy.
Okay, great. Then we'll move to committee comments. Any board member or committee members have any comments?
Nope.
Nothing further, thanks.
All right. Well, thank you all. This was a wonderful meeting. And I just have to say, thank you so much to the technical staff that works in the background. We all know who they are because they take care of us and get the microphones working and everything else. It was a challenge today. It's always a challenge. This is pretty weird times as I look at the screen. Deborah Ocker and I are the only ones wearing masks, and that's because we showed up here. I'm never going to do that again, by the way. I'm joking. I hope we can get back to normal.
It's okay.
Thank you all for your wonderful reports and have a great, it's only Tuesday. Don't have a great weekend for a few more days, but take care and thank you.
Thank
We
you.
are adjourned.